November 15, 1961. Marcus Rodriguez had 48 hours to photograph Fidel Castro's mountain fortress before the assassination team moved in. He was 27 years old, CIA's golden boy, the man they trusted with America's most classified secrets. That's exactly why Castro let him live. The compound was empty when Marcus arrived. No guards, no Castro. Just a single photograph pinned to a wooden table. Marcus's wife and infant daughter at their Virginia home, taken 3 days earlier. Someone had been watching. Someone had been waiting. And when Marcus radioed for extraction, he discovered his handler had vanished along with the entire strike team. For 63 years, Marcus believed he'd escaped Cuba with his life. He built a new identity, raised his daughter alone, never spoke Castro's name again. But tonight, the same photograph arrived at his door. Same table, same mountain compound, different date stamp, yesterday. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Rodriguez's hands hadn't trembled in 23 years. Not since the morning he'd walked off that fishing boat in Key West, salt-crusted and hollow-eyed, carrying nothing but a fake passport and the weight of 15 dead operatives. Now, at 64, his fingers shook as he held the photograph under his kitchen light. The paper was modern, digital print on photo stock, but the image was impossible. The wooden table in Castro's mountain compound had been burned to ash by a Soviet cleanup crew in December 1961. Marcus had read the intelligence reports himself before disappearing into witness protection, yet here it was, every grain of wood identical to his memory. Every shadow falling exactly where it had 63 years ago. And in the corner, where his infant daughter's face had once smiled back at him from that terrifying original, now sat a different photograph. Elena Rodriguez Morrison, 34, stepping out of CIA headquarters in Langley. Yesterday's date stamp glowed in the corner, his daughter. The baby he'd held for 6 precious months before Cuba destroyed everything. Now a senior intelligence analyst with level 7 clearance, living under her married name, believing her father had died in a car accident when she was 2. The lie had kept her safe. Marcus had made sure of that, watching from a distance as she grew up with foster parents, excelled at Georgetown, joined the agency. He'd never contacted her, never risked exposing her to the ghosts that followed him, but someone knew. Someone had connected Marcus Rodriguez, the failed operative, to Elena Rodriguez Morrison, the rising star. Marcus moved to his kitchen window, muscle memory from 3 decades of paranoia. The tree line beyond his property remained still. No glint of rifle scopes, no heat signatures moving through the Virginia woods. His early warning sensors, crude but effective devices he'd installed along every access route, showed green across the board. The package had been hand-delivered. No postmark, no tracking number, just his name written in block letters on brown paper, sitting on his porch like a venomous snake coiled to strike. Inside his den, Marcus pulled the false panel from behind his bookshelf. The space contained everything he'd promised himself he'd never need again: encrypted radio, untraceable satellite phone, go bag with 40,000 in cash and 3 sets of documents. And buried beneath it all, wrapped in oilcloth like a dead man's confession, the original mission files from Operation Mongoose. He'd stolen them during his debrief in 1962, insurance against the day someone might try to rewrite history. The CIA believed these documents had been lost in a fire. Castro's intelligence service thought they'd been destroyed. But Marcus had learned early that in the shadow world, information was the only currency that never lost value. His hands steadied as he opened the files. Names, dates, operational details. 15 men had gone into Cuba with him. 12 had died in the initial ambush. The ambush that never should have happened unless someone had given Castro their exact position, timing, and extraction plan. 2 had been captured alive. Marcus still woke up some nights hearing their screams from Castro's interrogation chambers, broadcast over shortwave radio for 72 straight hours. Psychological warfare at its finest. That left Marcus as the only survivor, the only witness to how perfectly orchestrated the betrayal had been, how someone with access to the highest levels of CIA planning had sold them out for Soviet gold. His handler, James Kellerman, had vanished 3 days before the mission went sideways. Official story: heart attack while deep-sea fishing off Miami. Body never recovered. Very convenient, very clean. Marcus had spent the first decade of his exile trying to prove Kellerman was alive, following paper trails that led nowhere, chasing shadows across 3 continents. The man was either dead or had disappeared into a Soviet protection program so deep that even Marcus's considerable skills couldn't penetrate it. But this photograph changed everything. Whoever sent it knew details only 3 people could have known: Marcus, Kellerman, and Castro himself. Castro was dying, had been for years, though he refused to let go of power. His brother Raul had taken over most operations, but the old revolutionary's mind remained sharp enough for one final game. One last move against the Americans who'd tried to kill him in his prime. Marcus reached for his encrypted phone, then stopped. Who could he call? Who could he trust? The CIA would either disavow him or eliminate him to prevent embarrassment. His few remaining contacts from the old days were dead or retired. And Elena was the target now. Whatever Castro's endgame, it centered on making Marcus watch his daughter suffer for his failures. The same psychological torture the old bastard had perfected over 6 decades in power. Outside, a branch snapped in the woods. Marcus killed the lights and moved toward his weapons cache, the photograph still clutched in his left hand. Through the window, infrared signatures moved between the trees. 3 figures, professionally spaced, approaching from the south. After 63 years, the ghosts of Cuba had finally come home. And they weren't coming alone. Marcus dropped below the window line, his body moving with the fluid precision of muscle memory that never truly faded. The photograph crinkled against his palm as he army crawled toward the den, counting seconds in his head. Professional teams moved at predictable speeds through wooded terrain. He had maybe 90 seconds before they reached his porch. The weapons cache lay behind a false panel beneath his desk, a Sig Sauer P226, 2 loaded magazines, and a K-bar knife wrapped in suppressor cloth. His fingers found the hidden release without looking, the same motion he'd practiced every morning for 23 years during his coffee routine. A ritual born of paranoia that suddenly felt like salvation. But as he gripped the pistol's familiar weight, something stopped him. A memory, sharp and unwelcome, of Elena at 6 months old, sleeping in her crib while he cleaned this same weapon at their kitchen table in Miami. How her tiny fingers had curled around his thumb when he'd lifted her for her 2 a.m. feeding. Her dark eyes, Carolina's eyes, staring up at him with absolute trust. That was the wound that never healed. Not the bullet scar across his ribs or the shrapnel fragments still lodged in his left shoulder. The knowledge that his daughter had grown up believing her father was dead because keeping her safe meant staying a ghost. Through the den window, he caught movement. A flash of tactical gear between the oak trees. These weren't Castro's men. Wrong equipment, wrong formation, too clean, too American. Which meant Elena wasn't just a target, she was bait. Marcus eased toward the kitchen, keeping low, the hardwood floors silent under his feet. 23 years of living in this cabin had taught him every board that creaked, every shadow that shifted with the changing light. The place had been his sanctuary, his self-imposed prison, his penance for surviving when better men had died. The kitchen still smelled like the coffee he'd brewed 4 hours ago, back when his biggest concern had been whether the tomatoes in his garden would survive the late frost. Such a simple life he'd built here. Groceries at the small market in town every Thursday. Chess games with Harold Brennan, the retired postmaster who lived 3 miles down the mountain road. Tending his vegetable garden with the same methodical precision he'd once used to plan Black Ops. A quiet existence for a man carrying the weight of ghosts. The motion sensor alarm chirped twice, his early warning system detecting movement at the property's eastern perimeter. They were surrounding him, which meant they wanted him alive. Dead men couldn't lead them to whatever they were really after. Marcus thought of Elena again, the recent surveillance photo burning in his mind. She'd been carrying a briefcase, walking with the confident stride he remembered from Carolina. His wife had moved the same way, like she owned whatever ground her feet touched. Elena had inherited that strength, that stubborn resilience that had first drawn him to her mother in a Georgetown coffee shop 37 years ago. Carolina had known what he did for a living, accepted the long absences and the questions he couldn't answer. She'd understood that some secrets were carried alone. Right up until the morning he'd kissed her goodbye, promised to be home in time for Elena's first birthday, and walked into an ambush that destroyed everything he'd ever loved. The cancer had taken Carolina 8 years later. Marcus had watched the funeral from a hill 2 miles away, Elena's tiny hand holding onto her foster mother's dress as they lowered the casket. He'd wanted to run to his daughter, gather her up, tell her that her daddy was alive and would never let anything hurt her. Instead, he'd driven back to Virginia and added another lock to his door. A shadow passed by the kitchen window, there and gone in an instant. Marcus slowed his breathing, listening for the subtle sounds that would tell him their exact positions. 3 men, maybe 4, moving with the disciplined patience of professionals who knew their target was trapped. But they didn't know about the root cellar. Marcus had dug it himself during his second winter here, when the nightmares were still fresh and every sound in the woods sent him reaching for weapons that weren't there. The tunnel ran 40 yards underground, emerging behind the tool shed near his truck, an escape route he'd prayed he'd never need. The floorboards above creaked as boots crossed his front porch. Someone was testing the door handle, checking for the resistance that would indicate deadbolts or security chains. Marcus had both, plus a reinforced frame and steel core construction. It would buy him maybe 2 minutes against a professional entry team. Time enough to disappear into the darkness and begin the hardest mission of his life, saving the daughter who didn't know he existed from enemies who'd waited 6 decades for their revenge. The front door exploded inward with a controlled blast that rattled every window in the house. Marcus was already gone. The tunnel smelled like damp earth and 23 years of fear. Marcus crawled through the narrow passage he'd carved during those first paranoid winters. The surveillance photograph folded against his chest, Elena's face pressed against his heart like a prayer. Behind him, boots thundered across his kitchen floor and voices barked orders in crisp American accents. CIA. Had to be, which meant Elena had already made her move. Marcus emerged behind the tool shed, staying low as he approached his truck. The 2019 Ford F-150 looked like standard rural Virginia transportation, but the engine was rebuilt military spec and the panels hid level TA armor plating. Old habits from a man who'd learned to prepare for the worst-case scenario because the worst case had already happened once. His encrypted satellite phone buzzed against his ribs as he slipped into the driver's seat. Unknown number, international prefix he didn't recognize. Marcus stared at the device for 3 seconds, knowing that answering would shatter whatever remained of his carefully constructed exile. But the alternative was letting Elena walk blind into whatever trap Castro had spent decades preparing. He accepted the call. "Papa." The voice was older, weathered by years and cigarettes, but unmistakable. Fidel Castro himself, still alive, still playing games. "Do you remember me?" Marcus's blood turned to ice water. He'd heard that voice exactly once before, crackling over shortwave radio from a Cuban prison cell while his captured teammates screamed in the background. Psychological warfare designed to break the one man who'd escaped. "I remember your hospitality," Marcus said, his own voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Through the truck's rear window, he could see flashlight beams sweeping through his cabin. 63 years is a long time to hold a grudge. Castro's laugh was a dry rasp. "Time means nothing to men like us, Marcus. We are defined by our unfinished business." A pause, papers rustling. "Your daughter is very beautiful, very talented. Her analysis of our missile defense systems was quite insightful. We were impressed by her thoroughness." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Elena hadn't just been photographed. She'd been compromised. Her work, her security clearance, her entire career. Castro had been watching her, studying her, waiting for the perfect moment to complete his revenge. "What do you want?" Marcus kept his voice level, professional. The same tone he'd used during hostage negotiations in Beirut, arms deals in Bangkok, the deadly chess games that defined his former life. "Justice," Castro replied. "Your friends killed my brother Raul in 1961. Did you know that? The official story says he died fighting in the mountains, a revolutionary hero. But the truth is simpler. Your team put 2 bullets in his head while he slept. Marcus closed his eyes. That detail had never made it into the mission files. Raul Castro's death had been classified beyond the highest levels, a secret so dangerous that even admitting knowledge of it was a death sentence. But Marcus remembered. Third night of the operation. Rodriguez, the other Rodriguez, no relation despite the name, had taken the shot while Marcus provided overwatch. Ancient history, Marcus said. Nothing is ancient when it lives in your dreams. Castro's voice turned cold. I have spent 63 years perfecting my response. Not quick revenge. That would be crude. No, I wanted something more artistic, more personal. Through the phone, Marcus could hear paper being turned, the sound of photographs being arranged. Your handler, James Kellerman, Castro continued. He sold you out beautifully, didn't he? Gave us your entire operational plan for 30 pieces of Soviet silver. But what you never knew was that I made him an additional offer. A bonus payment for one specific service. Marcus felt the world tilt sideways. What service? I asked him to keep track of your daughter, to make sure she followed a very specific career path. Georgetown University, intelligence studies, CIA recruitment straight from graduation, fast-tracked promotions, assignment to our Caribbean desk. Castro's voice carried the satisfaction of a man who'd orchestrated a symphony of destruction across decades. She never had a choice, Marcus. Every opportunity, every mentor, every assignment that shaped her life, I arranged them all. The phone nearly slipped from Marcus's grip. Elena's entire career, her marriage to Thomas Morrison, another CIA analyst, her security clearance, her access to Cuban intelligence files, none of it had been her choice. She'd been guided, manipulated, positioned like a chess piece for this moment. Kellerman is dead, Marcus said, though his voice lacked conviction. James retired to a lovely estate outside Havana in 1975. We've had many pleasant conversations about your family over the years. He's actually quite fond of Elena, proud of how well his protege has developed. Castro's breathing was labored now, the sound of a dying man savoring his final victory. But enough conversation. Your daughter has something that belongs to me, information she extracted from our defense computers during her last operation. She doesn't realize its significance yet, but she will soon enough. What information? The location of every Soviet nuclear device still hidden on American soil. Missiles that were supposed to be removed after our little crisis in 1962, but which remained for insurance purposes. Papers rustled again. Elena discovered them yesterday. She's scheduled to brief your National Security Council tomorrow morning. Marcus understood now. Elena wasn't just being targeted for revenge. She was the key to Castro's final gambit, exposing decades-old nuclear weapons on American soil, triggering a crisis that would destroy relations between Washington and Moscow, validate Cuba's claims of American aggression, and cement Castro's legacy as the man who brought the world's greatest superpower to its knees. And if Elena delivered that briefing, she'd be signing her own death warrant. Too dangerous to live with such knowledge. The cabin's windows exploded outward as the search team detonated flashbang grenades inside. Marcus started his engine, knowing his 23 years of peace had just ended forever. "Welcome back to the game, Marcus," Castro whispered, and the line went dead. The truck's engine turned over with a reassuring growl, but Marcus's hands shook as he gripped the steering wheel. Castro's words echoed in his skull like shrapnel. Elena discovered them yesterday. Nuclear weapons, hidden for 60 years. His daughter, their daughter, walking into a death trap disguised as a briefing. He could drive away, right now. Follow the mountain roads to the interstate. Use one of his false identities to disappear into the American heartland. Let Elena deliver her briefing. Let the world burn. Let Castro win his final game. Marcus had spent 23 years perfecting the art of running from his past. But the surveillance photograph lay on the passenger seat, Elena's face staring up at him with Carolina's determined expression. The same look his wife had worn the morning she'd told him she was pregnant, that mix of fierce protectiveness and absolute certainty that everything would work out because it had to. Marcus reached for his secure phone, scrolling through contacts he hadn't called in decades. Names from the old life. The shadow world where loyalty was currency and betrayal was death. Most would be dead by now. Others would refuse to answer calls from ghosts. He tried Frank Devlin first, his old communications specialist, the man who'd taught him that silence often carried more intelligence than words. The number was disconnected. Marcus tried 2 more contacts, both disconnected. The agency had scrubbed them all, or time had simply erased the networks that once seemed permanent. Behind him, voices carried through the night air. The search team was coordinating something, their tone urgent but controlled. They'd found the tunnel entrance by now, realized their target had slipped through their fingers. Professional embarrassment would make them more aggressive. His phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. Stop running. We need to talk. Marcus stared at the screen, ice forming in his chest. Only 5 people in the world had this number. 3 were dead. 1 was himself. The 5th, another message. Denny's on Route 11, 20 minutes. Come alone or Elena dies tonight. The phone number carried a Virginia area code, but that meant nothing in the modern world. Could be anyone, anywhere. Castro's people, the CIA team currently tearing apart his cabin, or someone else entirely, another player in a game Marcus thought he understood. He'd trained Elena's mother in basic tradecraft, back when their relationship was new, and he'd still believed they could build something permanent together. Simple things. How to spot surveillance, how to communicate in code, how to disappear if his world ever came crashing down. Carolina had laughed at his paranoia, called it his spy movie fantasies. She'd stopped laughing after Elena was born, started asking harder questions about his absences, his inability to explain what he did for a living, the way he checked every room they entered and always sat facing the exits. The questions had become arguments, the arguments had become silences, and the silences had made it easier for him to walk away when his cover was blown. Marcus pulled onto the mountain road, his headlights cutting through darkness that felt alive with watching eyes. The Denny's was 15 miles down the mountain, a tired truck stop that served burned coffee to travelers who'd lost their way. Neutral ground, if such a thing existed anymore. He thought about calling Elena directly. Her number was in the CIA directory, publicly listed for her analytical position. But what would he say? Hello, daughter I abandoned 36 years ago. You're about to be murdered by a dying dictator who's been orchestrating your entire life? The secure phone rang again. Different number, different country code. Rodriguez. The voice was American familiar in a way that made Marcus's blood freeze. Been a long time. James Kellerman, alive. The handler who'd sold them out in 1961, who'd betrayed 15 good men for Soviet gold, who'd supposedly died of a heart attack while fishing off Miami. Jimmy. Marcus kept his voice steady, professional. Enjoying retirement? Havana's lovely this time of year. Warm beaches, excellent cigars, and the conversation is fascinating. Fidel tells such wonderful stories about the old days. Kellerman's laugh carried the easy confidence of a man who'd chosen the winning side. You know, he's quite impressed with Elena. Says she reminds him of you at that age. Determined, methodical, absolutely convinced she's fighting for the right cause. Where is she? Safe, for now. But you know how quickly these situations can change. One wrong move, one missed deadline, and accidents happen. The intelligence community is so dangerous these days. Marcus reached the bottom of the mountain, the truck's headlights sweeping across the Denny's parking lot. 3 vehicles, a long-haul trucker grabbing coffee, a family with Virginia plates, and a black sedan with government tags that might as well have had CIA stenciled on the doors. The restaurant, Marcus said. Your people? Insurance, Kellerman replied. We need to have a conversation about Elena's future, about whether she lives to see her next birthday, about whether you're ready to finish what we started in Cuba 63 years ago. The line went dead, leaving Marcus alone with his ghosts and his choices. Marcus sat in the truck for 30 seconds, watching the black sedan through his windshield, while fragments of memory carved themselves deeper into his skull. Kellerman's voice, unchanged by 6 decades, the same casual arrogance that had marked their final briefing in Miami, when Jimmy had looked each team member in the eye and promised them clean extraction routes that led straight into Cuban prison cells. 15 good men. Marcus could still recite their names like a prayer. Rodriguez, Chen, Kowalski, Murphy, Brennan, Williams, Torres, Jackson, Patterson, Mitchell, Sullivan, Barnes, Walker, Thompson, Hayes. Boys, really. The oldest was 26. They'd believed in America, in the mission, in the handler who'd studied their files and learned exactly which buttons to push. Rodriguez loved his mother in San Antonio. Chen wanted to make his immigrant parents proud. Kowalski was saving money to marry his high school sweetheart. All dead because Jimmy Kellerman had a mortgage payment and the Soviets had deep pockets. Marcus stepped out of the truck, the mountain air sharp against his face. Through the Denny's windows, he could see a figure in the back booth, silhouetted against fluorescent lighting, alone, waiting. The trap was almost insultingly obvious, but Elena's life hung in the balance, and his daughter didn't even know her father was still breathing. The door chime announced his entrance like a church bell tolling midnight. The restaurant was exactly what he'd expected: worn vinyl booths, coffee that had been brewing since Clinton was president, and the kind of fluorescent lighting that made everyone look like they were dying. 3 customers. The trucker hunched over pie at the counter, the family with 2 sleeping children in a corner booth, and in the back the ghost of James Kellerman. 63 years had carved lines around his handler's eyes, turned his hair white, and added 30 pounds to his frame. But the smile was identical, that same predatory confidence Marcus remembered from their final briefing. The smile of a man who'd never paid for his sins. "You look good, Marcus," Kellerman said as Marcus slid into the opposite seat. "Mountain air agrees with you. Though I have to say, living as Daniel Morrison was inspired. Same last name as Elena's husband. Were you keeping tabs on your little girl?" The waitress approached, coffee pot in hand, but Kellerman waved her away. They were alone in their corner of purgatory, surrounded by the ambient noise of interstate traffic and broken dreams. "Thomas Morrison," Marcus said quietly. "You arranged that marriage." "Guilty." Kellerman's grin widened. "Thomas was one of our assets from day one. Yale's Skull and Bones, 3rd-generation CIA, absolutely perfect breeding stock for the next phase of our operation. Elena never suspected a thing. She thought it was love." He chuckled, the sound like grinding bone. "Love. As if people like us are capable of such luxury." Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. Elena's marriage, her children, if she had children, even her most intimate relationships had been choreographed by the same man who'd orchestrated the deaths of 15 American patriots. Every birthday, every anniversary, every moment of happiness had been built on lies. "Where is she now?" Marcus asked. "Dulles Airport. Flight to Caracas left 20 minutes ago." Kellerman checked his watch, a gold Rolex that probably cost more than most people's cars. "She thinks she's following up on intelligence leads about Venezuelan nuclear cooperation. Very patriotic of her to volunteer for such a dangerous assignment." Venezuela. Marcus's blood turned to ice water. "Castro's there. Has been for 3 weeks. Amazing what modern medical technology can accomplish, even for dying revolutionaries. Portable dialysis, experimental treatments, enough drugs to keep a corpse walking." Kellerman's voice dropped to a whisper. "He wants to look Elena in the eye when he explains exactly how he destroyed your family. How every choice she ever made was his choice. How her children, yes, Marcus, you're a grandfather, carry the genes of a man who tried to assassinate him." The words hit like physical blows. Elena had children. His bloodline continued. Innocent lives carrying forward the legacy of his failures. And Castro, dying but not dead, had orchestrated a 60-year symphony of psychological warfare designed to destroy not just Marcus, but every generation that followed. "What does he want from me?" Marcus asked. Kellerman reached into his jacket and withdrew a manila envelope, placing it carefully on the table between them. "Simple exchange. You for her. One life for another. The man who escaped in 1961 finally pays his debt. And my grandchildren? They'll grow up believing their mother died serving her country. Clean story, heroic sacrifice, college funds provided by grateful government. They'll never know their grandfather was a traitor who sold American nuclear secrets to communist insurgents." Marcus stared at the envelope, understanding that everything inside would be lies designed to frame him posthumously. Evidence planted decades ago, documents backdated and verified. witnesses whose testimony would survive any investigation. Kellerman had spent 60 years perfecting this moment. Outside, a truck engine rumbled to life. The family was packing their sleeping children into their minivan. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that the fate of the free world was being decided over cold coffee and broken dreams. "I need proof she's alive," Marcus said. Kellerman slid a cell phone across the table. "She'll call in exactly 3 minutes. You can say goodbye." Marcus stared at the phone, its black screen reflecting the diner's sickly fluorescent glow. 3 minutes to hear his daughter's voice for the first time since she was 2 years old. 3 minutes to say goodbye to the child he'd abandoned to protect her from exactly this moment. The seconds crawled past like years. Kellerman sipped his coffee with theatrical calm, savoring every moment of Marcus's anguish. The trucker at the counter paid his check and left, bell chiming his departure. The family with sleeping children whispered about road conditions and gas mileage. Normal conversations in a normal world that no longer existed. 2 minutes. "You know what the beautiful part is?" Kellerman's voice carried the satisfied tone of a man delivering a masterpiece. "Elena thinks she discovered those nuclear sites through her own brilliant analysis. Spent 3 months cross-referencing satellite imagery with declassified Soviet shipping records. She's so proud of her detective work." Marcus said nothing, but his hands clenched beneath the table. "We fed her every piece of evidence, every document that led her to the right conclusions, made her feel like the smartest analyst in Langley." Kellerman's smile turned ugly. "She has no idea she's been dancing to Fidel's tune her entire life. Just like her father. 1 minute." The phone vibrated against the table. Marcus reached for it, then stopped. Something in Kellerman's expression had shifted, a flicker of uncertainty, quickly suppressed. The same micro-expression Marcus had noticed during their final briefing in 1961, right before everything went to hell. "You're afraid," Marcus said quietly. "Excuse me?" "You're afraid she won't make the call." Marcus studied his former handler's face, reading the tells he'd been too young to recognize 60 years ago. "Because you don't actually control this situation. You never did." The phone rang. Marcus answered, putting it on speaker. "Elena? Dad?" The voice was uncertain, confused. Adult, but carrying echoes of the little girl who used to climb into his lap and demand bedtime stories. "They told me you were dead. They said you died in a car accident when I was 3. Kellerman's confidence cracked slightly. "This wasn't the script he'd written. I had to disappear, sweetheart, to protect you." Marcus kept his eyes locked on Kellerman's face. "Where are you right now?" I think I'm in Venezuela, but Dad, something's wrong. The man who brought me here, he's not CIA. And there's an old Cuban guy who keeps talking about some mission from 1961, about nuclear weapons and—" Her voice cut off, replaced by background noise. "Elena." Marcus gripped the phone harder. A new voice came on the line, heavily accented, weak with illness but unmistakably commanding. Marcus Rodriguez, the one who escaped. Fidel Castro, alive, dying, and still playing games across decades. "Let her go, Fidel. She's innocent." "Innocent?" Castro's laugh dissolved into a coughing fit. "Your daughter has spent her entire career hunting my people, disrupting my operations, killing my agents with her analysis. But you're right about one thing. She had no choice in the matter. I made sure of that." Marcus felt the world shift beneath his feet. "What are you talking about?" "Every assignment, every promotion, every target she identified, I arranged them all. Through our mutual friend here." There was a pause, the sound of papers shuffling. "Elena Rodriguez Morrison has been my most effective weapon against Cuban intelligence for 15 years. She just never knew she was working for me." The revelation hit like a physical blow. Elena hadn't been manipulated into discovering nuclear sites. She'd been turned into a weapon against her father's enemies, eliminating Castro's rivals and consolidating his power while believing she was serving American interests. "You used her to kill your own people," Marcus whispered. "I used her to kill Therite people, generals who challenged my authority, intelligence officers who questioned my methods, even my own brother's supporters." Castro's voice carried 60 years of calculated brutality. "Your daughter has been extraordinarily useful, Marcus. Almost as useful as she'll be when the Americans discover she's been a Cuban asset her entire career. Kellerman was sweating now, his earlier confidence evaporating. This wasn't his operation anymore. It never had been. The beautiful irony, Castro continued, is that she actually discovered real nuclear sites 3 days ago. Weapons I've been hiding for 60 years, sites I was finally ready to reveal. She thinks she's delivering intelligence to save America, but she's actually giving me the perfect cover story for when those weapons detonate. Marcus stood up slowly, understanding flooding through him like ice water. You're not trying to expose the weapons. You're going to use them. 6 devices, 6 American cities, and when the radiation signatures are analyzed, they'll trace back to Soviet uranium that your daughter discovered through her investigation. Castro's breathing was labored but satisfied. The perfect frame. Cuba gets its revenge, Elena gets blamed for the greatest intelligence failure in American history, and you watch your daughter become the most hated woman in America before she dies in federal custody. Fidel, Marcus said quietly, you made one mistake. What mistake? You told Kellerman too much. And Jimmy always did have a problem keeping secrets when he was scared. Kellerman's eyes widened as he realized what Marcus had figured out. The phone was still connected, and for the last 5 minutes, every word had been transmitted directly to CIA emergency frequencies. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 heartbeats before chaos erupted on both ends of the connection. ¿Qué carajo? Castro's voice exploded through the speaker, followed by rapid Spanish that Marcus couldn't catch. Background noise, shouting, running footsteps, the metallic clatter of weapons being readied. Then Elena's voice, sharp and clear, Dad, they're moving me. I can see. The line went dead. Kellerman's face had gone the color of old newspaper. His hands trembled as he reached for his own phone, but Marcus was faster, slamming his palm down on the device hard enough to crack the screen. 60 years, Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of accumulated rage. 60 years you let me believe I was the one who got those boys killed, that my operational security failed, that I was responsible for 15 body bags coming home to grieving mothers. Marcus, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. Marcus leaned across the table, his face inches from his former handlers. You've been playing both sides since day one. Castro never turned Elena against her own people. You did. You fed him intelligence about which of his generals were getting too independent, which of his officers were considering defection. My daughter wasn't his weapon against Cuban intelligence. She was your weapon. The diner's front door chimed, and Marcus caught the reflection in the window. 2 men in dark suits, moving with the purposeful stride of federal agents. Not CIA. The way they held themselves, the tactical awareness in their approach. NSA. Or maybe something darker, something that didn't officially exist. They're not here for you, Kellerman whispered, following Marcus's gaze. They're here for me. The transmission you triggered, it didn't just go to CIA emergency frequencies, it went everywhere. Every intelligence service, every monitoring station, every black site listening post between here and Guantanamo. Marcus felt a cold smile touch his lips. Good. You have no idea what you've done. The nuclear sites Elena discovered, they're not all in Venezuela. Castro's been moving those weapons for weeks. 6 cities, Marcus. New York, Washington, Miami, Los Angeles, Houston, Chicago. 2 million people will die because you wanted your revenge. No. Marcus stood, his chair scraping against linoleum that had seen too many desperate conversations. 2 million people will live because my daughter is smarter than both of us combined. Kellerman's confusion was genuine. What are you talking about? Elena's been analyzing intelligence for 15 years. You think she never noticed the patterns? Never wondered why every target she identified conveniently eliminated Castro's domestic opposition while strengthening his position internationally? Marcus picked up the manila envelope Kellerman had placed on the table, feeling the weight of forged documents and fabricated evidence. She's been running a counter-operation for at least 5 years, maybe longer. The federal agents were at the door now, hands resting casually on concealed weapons. Through the window, Marcus could see black SUVs blocking every exit from the parking lot. Professional, thorough, and utterly without mercy. Impossible, Kellerman breathed. The nuclear sites she discovered. The uranium signatures that were supposed to frame her as a Cuban asset. She's been feeding you information designed to expose the entire network. Marcus felt pieces clicking together like a puzzle he'd been solving his whole life. Every document she analyzed, every target she identified, every piece of intelligence she delivered, it was all designed to make Castro believe he was using her while she mapped every connection between Havana and Washington. Kellerman's phone buzzed against the cracked screen. A text message, visible despite the damage, all sites secure. Devices in custody. Castro in custody. Elena's safe. 60 years, Marcus repeated, watching his former handler's world collapse in real time. You spent 60 years orchestrating the perfect revenge. Castro spent 60 years believing he was manipulating my daughter, and Elena spent 15 years letting both of you dance to her tune while she built an airtight case for treason against every American asset in Castro's network. The federal agents entered the diner, their movements precise and coordinated. The remaining customers, if they'd ever been real customers, were already gone, leaving Marcus and Kellerman alone with the consequences of 6 decades of lies. She played you both, Marcus said, feeling something like pride break through 60 years of guilt and self-recrimination. My little girl grew up to be smarter than her old man ever dreamed. Kellerman looked up as the agents approached, his face carrying the expression of a man who'd finally understood the punchline of a joke he'd been telling his entire life. The phone call, he whispered. When she said something was wrong, when she acted confused. Performance, Marcus confirmed. Elena needed Castro to reveal the full scope of his operation. She needed him to confess to 60 years of psychological warfare, to detail the nuclear plot, to implicate every asset and every connection. She needed it all on a recorded line that would hold up in any court. The lead agent reached their table, credentials already visible. James Kellerman, you're under arrest for treason. The handcuffs clicked shut around Kellerman's wrists with the finality of a coffin lid closing. Marcus watched his former handler's face cycle through disbelief, rage, and finally a kind of hollow acceptance that comes when a man realizes his entire life has been built on quicksand. You have the right to remain silent, the lead agent continued, but Marcus barely heard the words. His attention was fixed on the second agent, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and eyes that carried the weight of classified knowledge. She was looking directly at him, and something in her expression made his chest tighten. Mr. Rodriguez, she said quietly, there's someone who wants to speak with you. She handed him a secure satellite phone, military grade, the kind that could punch through any interference. Marcus took it with hands that had started shaking somewhere between relief and terror. Dad? Elena's voice came through crystal clear this time. No background chaos, no confusion. Just his daughter, alive and safe and talking to him after 23 years of silence. Elena. The name came out broken, carrying decades of accumulated love and loss. Are you hurt? I'm fine. Dad, I'm so sorry. For all of it. For letting you believe you were responsible for those deaths. For letting you think you had to hide, had to live under another name, had to give up everything that mattered to you. Marcus sank back into the booth, suddenly feeling every one of his 64 years. Around him, the federal agents were efficiently processing the scene, but their movements seemed distant, unimportant. The only thing that mattered was his daughter's voice. How long have you known? He asked. About you being alive? 5 years. About the real scope of what Kellerman and Castro were doing? 3 years. About the nuclear weapons. A pause, and when she continued, her voice carried the steel of a professional intelligence officer. 48 hours. We've been tracking those devices for the last 2 days, following the radiation signatures and cross-referencing them with shipping manifests that Castro thought were secure. Marcus glanced at Kellerman, who was being led toward the door in handcuffs. The old man looked broken, diminished, like a magician whose greatest trick had been revealed as clumsy sleight of hand. Why didn't you contact me sooner? Marcus asked. Because I needed to be sure, and because, Elena's voice softened, becoming the child he remembered. Because I was terrified you'd reject me, that you'd think I was part of their operation, that I'd chosen intelligence work over family. I didn't know if you could forgive me for becoming everything you'd tried to protect me from. The irony hit him like a physical blow. All these years, he'd been drowning in guilt over abandoning his daughter, while she'd been consumed by fear that he would see her career as a betrayal of his sacrifice. 2 generations of Rodriguez family members, each protecting the other from truths that would have brought them together instead of driving them apart. "Elena," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the tears he felt building behind his eyes, "I have never been prouder of anything in my life than I am of what you've accomplished. Not just the operation, though that was brilliant, but the woman you became, the mother you are. You know about my children?" Kellerman told me. "As a weapon to hurt me. But all I could think was how much I want to meet my grandchildren, how much I want to be part of their lives if you'll let me." The silence stretched between them, filled with possibilities Marcus had never dared to imagine. His daughter, his grandchildren, a chance to reclaim the family he'd sacrificed on the altar of national security. "Thomas isn't CIA," Elena said suddenly. "I know Kellerman told you he was an asset, but that was another lie. My husband is exactly what he appears to be. A boring tax attorney who thinks my most dangerous assignment involves auditing agricultural subsidies. I never told him the truth about my real work." Marcus felt another piece of his world shift back into place. His daughter's marriage wasn't a fabrication. Her children weren't the products of an intelligence operation. Elena had managed to build something real and clean and untouched by the darkness that had consumed her father's generation. "Where are you now?" he asked. "Caracas Airport. Military transport back to Andrews. I should be in Washington by tomorrow morning." A pause. "Dad, there's something else. Castro, he didn't make it. The stress of the arrest, his medical condition, he died en route to custody. His last words were about you, about how you were the only one who ever truly escaped him." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 60 years finally lifting from his shoulders. Fidel Castro was dead. James Kellerman was in custody. The nuclear weapons were secure, and his daughter was coming home. "Elena," he said, "I'd like to stop being Daniel Morrison now." "I'd like that too, Dad." Marcus Rodriguez sounds like someone I'd very much like to know. The farmhouse in rural Virginia had never felt like home until the morning Marcus Rodriguez sat on his front porch, watching his granddaughter chase chickens through the yard. 8-year-old Sophia moved with Elena's determined grace, her dark hair catching sunlight as she laughed at the indignant squawking of Mrs. Henderson's escaped birds. "Abuelo, help me catch Henrietta," Sophia called, using the Spanish word for grandfather that still made Marcus's chest tighten with unexpected joy. 6 months ago, he'd been Daniel Morrison, a man who existed only in forged documents and careful lies. Now he was teaching his granddaughter the same Cuban lullabies his own mother had sung to him 70 years ago. Elena emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of coffee, moving carefully around 10-year-old Michael, who sat cross-legged on the porch reading a book about World War II codebreakers. The boy had inherited his mother's analytical mind and his grandfather's curiosity about the shadows between official history and classified truth. "Any regrets?" Elena asked, settling into the chair beside Marcus. The question had become a ritual between them, asked and answered every Sunday morning for the past 6 months. "None," Marcus replied, and meant it. He'd testified before 3 different congressional committees, spent countless hours in debriefing sessions, endured medical evaluations and psychological assessments. The government had officially restored his identity, cleared his record, and offered him a presidential medal he'd politely declined. The only recognition he wanted was sitting next to him, drinking coffee in comfortable silence. "Thomas still thinks you're a retired insurance investigator," Elena said with a smile. Her husband had never questioned the sudden appearance of his father-in-law, accepting the carefully constructed cover story about reconciliation after a long family estrangement. Some truths were worth protecting. Marcus watched Sophia finally corner the wayward chicken, her triumphant laughter echoing across the yard. How much does she understand? About what we do? Very little. About why Abuelo was gone for so long? Elena's expression grew thoughtful. She knows that sometimes people have to make hard choices to protect their families, that sometimes being brave means staying away from the people you love most. The weight of those years pressed against Marcus's memory, not with the crushing guilt he'd carried for decades, but with something approaching acceptance. The Bay of Pigs operation had cost 15 young lives, but it had also prevented something far worse. The nuclear weapons Castro had hidden for 60 years would have eventually found their way to American cities, with or without Kellerman's treachery. "I got a letter from Raúl Vasquez's daughter last week," Marcus said quietly. Raúl had been 19 when he died on that Cuban beach, the youngest member of their team. "She wants to meet me, to hear about her father's last mission." Elena reached over and squeezed his hand. They'd had this conversation before, about the responsibility of memory, about honoring the dead without being consumed by survivors' guilt. "Are you ready for that?" "I think so." Marcus felt the morning breeze carry the scent of Elena's herb garden, a mixture of cilantro and mint that reminded him of his childhood in Miami, before the revolution changed everything. Those boys died believing they were fighting for something important. They deserved to be remembered by people who understand what they sacrificed. Michael looked up from his book, his young face serious. "Mom says you were a hero in the old war." "Not a hero," Marcus corrected gently. "Just a soldier who lived longer than some of his friends." "That's what heroes always say," the boy replied with 10-year-old certainty, then returned to his reading. Elena laughed, a sound that carried no shadows of intelligence work or classified operations. For this moment, she was simply a mother enjoying a Sunday morning with her family. "He's been pestering me for weeks to hear your war stories." "Maybe someday," Marcus said, "when he's older, when he can understand that the most important victories are the ones nobody ever hears about." Sophia successfully delivered the escaped chicken back to the neighbor's yard and came running toward the porch, her face flushed with achievement. She climbed into Marcus's lap with the casual affection of a child who had never known a world where her grandfather was a ghost. "Tell me about Cuba again," she demanded, settling against his chest. "About the music and the dancing and the way the ocean looked from your window." So Marcus told her about the Havana he remembered, about a place that existed now only in the memories of old men and the dreams of their grandchildren. He spoke of music that could make stones weep, of sunsets that painted the sky in impossible colors, of a country that lived in his heart despite everything it had cost him. As his granddaughter's breathing grew steady against his chest, Marcus Rodriguez understood that some stories end not with triumph or tragedy, but with the simple grace of an ordinary morning. The war was over, his daughter was home, and for the first time in 60 years, tomorrow held nothing but possibility. The chickens settled into peaceful clucking, and the Virginia countryside embraced them all,